All right. And so our service begins on the first page with our adaptation of Shalom Aleichem, which praises those who pursue peace and who love peace.
Shalom Aleichem, Ohavei HaShalom, Shomerei Shalom. Shalom Aleichem, Ro'erfei Shalom, Shalom Aleichem. Boechem LaShalom, Ohavei HaShalom, Tzechem Shalom, miyom ze layamim habayim, shalom aleichem. Shalom aleichem, ohavei hashalom, shomerei shalom. Shalom aleichem, ro'erfei shalom, shalom aleichem.
Shabbat is a time when many may become one. The 6 days of the week run together in a busy blur. Shabbat helps us see how the many days of our lives weave together into life's tapestry, full of exciting colors and tranquil beauty. Each of us hold on to our own personal moments of deep meaning. Just as life is made up of many experiences, so too is our world defined by diversity. There are many visions of the good life, and there are many understandings of the nature of human existence. Some are parochial, only interested in the benefit of a particular group. Our identity is open, an identity that celebrates distinctiveness while learning from others. Shabbat is a time when one may learn from many. And I invite us to pause for just a moment, because Shabbat literally means to stop. And so I invite us to pause, to reflect, to breathe, to let go of the cares of the week, the concerns of the outside world, enter into a place of peace, stopping, and quiet. And now to light our Shabbat candles, I would like to invite our hosts of the Oneg this evening, Marilyn and Saruj, and Mark and Andrea, as we sing Baruch HaOr, let us light these lights.
Baruch HaOr, Baruch Hadat Shabbat, Baruch HaOr, Shalom. Baruch HaOr, Baruch Hadat Shabbat, Baruch HaOr, Shalom. Let us light these lights and see the way to joy, and let us say Simcha. Let us light these lights and see the way to love, and let us say Ahava. Let us light these lights and see the way to peace, and let us say Shalom. Let us light these lights and see the way to peace, and let us say Shalom. And let us say Shalom.
There is no one wine in the world. There are many, many, many varieties of red and white and rosé, and the different grapes that are out there, and of course, even the same grape growing in different climate and different sun and soil, it's all different. And the age is different. Even the same grape, the same harvest, over time changes itself into something else. And so the sharing of wine together is a celebration of that diversity. The many varieties of life, experience, culture, and community in the world are all brought together with this sharing of wine in a congregational setting. And so this evening I'll sing our Kiddush in Hebrew. Those who want to join me, please do. And then we'll say the English all together. Savri Maranan V'Rabbanan De'etmol Kiddashnu et Hayayin Savri Maranan V'Rabbanan De'Hayom Baruchim Haborim Pri Hagafen HaShabbat Mesamchenu HaShabbat Merapenu Legufotenu Linafshotenu HaShabbat Me'ashrenu Baruchim Hashomrim et Yom HaShabbat. Together in English. The rabbis and sages of old proclaimed, we sanctify this wine. The rabbis and sages of today proclaim, blessed is the fruit of the vine. The Shabbat makes us joyful. The Shabbat heals us in body and in spirit. The Shabbat enriches us. Blessed are those who keep the Shabbat. L'chaim, l'chaim, to life. You Don't Have to Be Jewish, by Roger Kamenetz. You don't have to be Jewish to love Levi's rye. You could be black, Italian, a Cherokee with very large teeth, grinning over a corned beef sandwich. You don't have to be Jewish to love, certainly or uncertainly. You don't have to be Jewish to love Levi's rye, or to love anything, a single caraway seed, or in the rough black seed of the 4 o'clock enclosed in pastel petals late afternoon. You know it's there, and you don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be Jewish to walk a mile with the sun going down Rosie in the park, or to love Rosie in the park or at home and Rosie loves you back. You don't have to be Jewish to chew slowly, tasting the rye breaking down into sugar. You just have to be willing to slow down time to a poster, a still photograph of you in your ethnic garb in the days when ethnicity was okay, not yet terrifying or indistinct. Kiss me, I'm Irish. And kiss me again, I'm gay, Italian, Chinese, and no parking, this space reserved for Polish. You don't have to be Jewish. You could be anything, amazing or distinct. You could have just once, for maybe an hour, a day, forgotten you were different. You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be to love bread. You don't have to be rye to love Jewish, but it helps.
Amar Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Akiva, V'ahavta l'reacha, l'reacha kamocha. Ze klal gadol, gadol b'Torah, Amar Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rabbi Akiva.
From a humanistic perspective, all religions start from the same common ground, the human experience. They claim that gods say things, but in reality, it's people saying what the gods say. It's people writing the insights they've gleaned from the human experience in the mouths of angels and deities and prophets. And so we can learn from each of these religious traditions different aspects of the human experience. And in these sources collected here, we'll find many common lessons from all corners of the world. Who is mighty? One who subdues his passions, as it is said, "He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules over his spirit than he that takes a city." Who is rich? He who rejoices in his portion, as it is said, "When you eat the labor of your hands, happy will you be, and it will be well with you." Knowing others is wisdom. Knowing the self is enlightenment. Mastering others requires force. Mastering the self requires strength. He who knows he has enough is rich. Let your conduct be marked by right action, including study and teaching of the Scriptures, by truthfulness in word, deed, and thought, by self-denial and the practice of austerity, by poise and self-control, by performance of the everyday duties of life with a cheerful heart and an unattached mind. A man said to Abdullah ibn Umar, "Why don't you carry out a military expedition?" Upon which he replied, "I heard Muhammad, may peace be upon him, say, in truth, Islam is founded on 5 pillars: testimony of monotheism, establishment of prayer, payment of charity, the fast of Ramadan, and pilgrimage to Mecca. You shall not hate your kinfolk in your heart. Correct your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love the world as your own self. Then you can truly care for all things."
On a wagon bound for market, there's a calf with a mournful eye. High above him there's a swallow winging swiftly through the sky. Oh, the wind is laughing, it laughs with all its might. Laugh and laugh the whole day through, and half the summer's night. Donna, 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 don. Donna, 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 don. Stop complaining, said the farmer. Who told you a calf to be? Why don't you have wings to fly with, like the swallow so proud and free? Oh, the wind is laughing, it laughs with all its might. Laugh and laugh the whole day through, and half the summer's night. Donna, 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 don. Donna, 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 don. Calves are easily bound and slaughtered, never knowing the reason why. But whoever treasures freedom, like the swallow, has learned to fly. Oh, the wind is laughing, it laughs with all its might. Laugh and laugh the whole day through, and half the summer's night. Donna, 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 don. Donna, 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 don.
All healthy people are proud of their identity. Ethnic pride is not necessarily parochial. Claiming to be good is not the same as claiming to be the best. Pride in our identity can become parochial, insisting that we are especially chosen by destiny. And there are deep evolutionary roots of supporting the family at the expense of the outside world. Today, we need a special awareness to focus on ourselves without losing sight of the humanity around us. The risks of pride are no reason to deny who we are or to hide our joy in being part of the Jewish people. We deal in truth, and the truth is that we find positive values in our identities as Americans, as Jews, as members of our families. Awareness of the dangers is no guarantee that parochial instincts will never emerge. The price of self-worth is eternal vigilance. When we celebrate our survival, we celebrate the power of life in all peoples.
Yisrael, Yisrael, Ami Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai v'Kayam. Yisrael, Yisrael, Ami Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai v'Kayam. Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai v'Kayam. Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai v'Kayam.
In modern life, we are more connected to the present than to the past. We participate in world culture and appreciate the varieties of human experience. We study world literature and world history more frequently than we study our own heritage. We will not return to the ghetto, but we can discover our past and celebrate it in new and exciting ways. The Jews are not the only people with such longings. By longing for our particular roots, we are being particularly human. This is a passage from Irish on the Inside by Tom Hayden. Yes, that Tom Hayden from the 1970s. We can start by re-inhabiting our Irish self in simple ways. Read Irish history, novels, and poetry. Listen to traditional Irish music. Learn a few words in the Irish language. Just a few will do, to show willing. Observe the old calendar of festivals based on the seasons of solstice and equinox. Give your child an Irish name. Save St. Patrick's Day from those who think that getting drunk makes you Irish. If you swap in Jewish for Irish, it would read just perfectly for us.
Hine ma tovu manaim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manaim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Shevet achim gam yachad, hine ma tov u'manayim. Shevet achim gam yachad, hine ma tov u'manayim. Shevet achim gam yachad.
We are Jews, we are Americans, but above all, we are human beings. Sometimes we forget this truth. Sometimes we only think about our own family. Sometimes we only think about our own friends. We look at other people and see them as strangers. The color of their skin is often different. The language they speak is not our own. We turn them into enemies before we give them a chance to become our friends. Our common humanity makes us see the truth. Underneath the different color, underneath the different speech, underneath the different costume, every person is a human being. Every person needs the dignity we need. Every person wants the happiness we want. Every person feels what we feel.
Lo yisagoy el goy cherev, lo yilmadu od milchama. Lo yisagoy el goy cherev, lo yilmadu od milchama. Lo yisagoy el goy cherev, lo yilmadu od milchama. Lo yisagoy el goy cherev, lo yilmadu od milchama.
Each of us has a name. Each of us has a name given by the source of life and given by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our stature and our smile and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given by the mountains and given by our walls. Each of us has a name given by the stars and given by our neighbors. Each of us has a name given by our sins and given by our longing. Each of us has a name given by our enemies and given by our love. Each of us has a name given by our celebrations and given by our work. Each of us has a name given by the seasons and given by our blindness. Each of us has a name given by the sea and given by our death. If I could ask you to please stand for just a moment. At Kol Hadash, when we gather for Shabbat once each month, we share the names of those loved ones, the anniversary of whose death or whose yahrzeit occurs at this time of year. And so tonight we remember, with great love, Bernice Aaron, Dorian Shalom, Garrett Cohn, Edward Dorfman, Richard Dreyfus, Nathan Eichner, Joanne Friedlander, Phyllis Gerberding, Rella Harris, Seema Hefter, Ray Holtzberg, Gerald Kane, Jerry Kane, Robert Cass, William Corr, Morris Lambert, Louis J. Moses, Rita Muroff, Mary Winandy Parker, Bert Passeltiner, Aaron Pashko, Norman Platnick, Nancy Rose, Evelyn Rosen, Abe Rosenzweig, Theodosia Sieber, Nancy Schaefer, Leonard Shepard, Joe Citrick, Herman Citrick, Dave Smith, James Citrick, David Marcus, Philip Citrick, Miriam Citrick, Sheldon Citrick, Louis Sonshine, Alice Tibbetts, and Molly Yolen. If there are any other names that those here this evening would like to share, either online or in person, please feel free to speak them out loud or to unmute and share at this time. Let us pause for a moment of silent tribute to their memory and in memory of all of our loved ones. In Jewish life, we say, Zecher Tzadikim Livracha, the memory of good people is a blessing to us. Please be seated as these words are sung.
Zecher Tzadikim Livracha, Zecher Tzadikim
To my right is our congregational menorah. Its 7 lights are emblematic of the 7 days of the week, the many strands of our lives that come together as one community. And so this is an opportunity to light a candle of joy, of simcha, to celebrate something wonderful in your life or the lives of people you know. It could be a candle of memory and remembrance of somebody whose anniversary of their death strikes you in this season. Or perhaps could be a candle of concern for someone facing a difficult time and an illness in their life. It's a chance to share what's happening in our community. And so at this point, I step back and open it up to you to come forward and to share. For those online as well, you're also able to participate. You're able to either type something in the chat or to unmute yourself and to share a message, and we're happy to light the candle on your behalf here in our sanctuary. And so I turn it over to you to share your simchas, your joys, your tsuras, your concerns, your memories, and your celebrations. Michelle, please. Oh. Joyce, go first. Light first. No, you have to talk to the mic for the people online.
Oh, okay. I want to wish my dear friend Kiki, who has been suffering and suffering, and I just wish her health and feel better, my dear friend.
So tonight we're here to remember my dad, Garrett Cohn, and he died 1 year ago, and I miss him every day. I would like to tell a little story, and so for those of you who have heard this story, forgive me, but embellish me. Anyways, when I was 10 years old, Garrett Cohn came into my life, and my mother married him 1 year later, and he became my dad. He was married by Rabbi Daniel Friedman. A few years after they were married, I was 10, my dad said to my mom, "Myrna, the kids need Jewish religion. We need to join a temple." And she really had no interest in it at all. But Garrett said, "It's important to me and I want the kids to go to Sunday school." And she said, "Fine, but I'm not driving. You have to drive." And he drove us every Sunday. We were a blended family. Rabbi Dan Friedman just reminded me, my parents were only 30 years old, and we were a blended family of 4 kids under the age of 10. 30 years old, can you even imagine? Oh my gosh. So Garrett Cohn was the most wonderful man, and not only was he now my father, he brought humanistic Judaism into our family, and it was a pillar of our family. The beliefs, the philosophies, it expanded not only from the temple, but into our home. And that is how we were raised as humanistic Jews. Myrna and Garrett were always trailblazers, from being divorced in the 60s, and now all of a sudden we're humanistic Jews, which no one heard of. But they were always trailblazers, and so, and that's who we are. So my sisters, Sharon and Laura, and my brother Adam, we were raised humanistic Jews, and I can't imagine our life being any different. It's just the most important thing in our life, and I miss him every day. But like I said to Joyce last time when we were here, the biggest gift Garrett and Myrna left me is you. You and you and you and this community. Because without this in my life, it's just so comforting to know you have a community of people, and we are so fortunate. People don't have this. We have it, and we might be small, and we're not the hugest temple on the North Shore, but the relationships we have sustained our lives, and they're so very, very special. And so I want to, again, remember Garrett Cohn for everything he was to me. I miss him every day. I love you, Daddy. And I also want to mention Sima Hefter, who you read her name every year. That's his sister. So we're remembering my Aunt Sima tonight, too. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Just a short, very happy note. In several weeks, our granddaughter is graduating down at Champaign-Urbana. And in September, she is officially going off to graduate school at Northeastern in Boston. So we'll miss having her close by, but it's all very good news.
In the chat, we had a message from Margie Marcus. Anthony, we have one other person on the line, and then you're up next. This week was the yard site of both my parents, my father on the 14th and mother on the 17th, years apart, but I always felt they died days apart because they wanted to be together, and they are in our yard site memories. And so now let me ask Ron online to share that message, and then Anthony to follow.
So this is a note of appreciation. Ron has a mentor for the Sydney donor quest and has been wonderful. And we yard signs that a number of people are playing for us. We have bumper stickers that are going to be going out, and I'm very grateful for everyone who has been supporting us.
Thank you. Anthony.
Well, we're all aware of what's happening with ICE coming to communities. A couple days ago, 3 people came to a home in Highwood, half a block around the corner from us, and they took a man who had no criminal record or anything. His wife and he had 4 children. One was brand new. I don't know the name because nothing's been released. He's gone. Who knows where he is? But the community began doing a GoFundMe campaign and started to buy things for the family that they're going to need. And, you know, the contributions are going up. It's great, but this is just beyond belief when it's happening so much everywhere.
Michelle took part of my talk because I feel very much the same way about this community. And so even for those who may not be aware, I wanted to share some amazing news with this community. After a 2-year struggle, during which time for about 8 months, we became the guardians for our 3 granddaughters. Yesterday, the court finalized full custody for my son and his wife, who were married by Rabbi Shalom. So we have a great deal to celebrate this weekend.
There's a popular Jewish social justice quotation from the Talmud. Whoever saves a life, it is as if they saved the entire universe. That passage in the Talmud was actually my bar mitzvah Hebrew reading some years ago. At my congregation, a humanistic congregation, we chose a hero from out of the Jewish experience, And we did a project based on their life. And then we found a Hebrew reading that spoke to the values they lived, the kind of person they were. I chose as my hero a man named Raoul Wallenberg. Raoul Wallenberg was a Swedish diplomat. He actually was an architect by training, but what he really was rich. He came from a very famous banking family. He happened to go to the University of Michigan, of all places, from Sweden, to get his bachelor's degree in architecture, and then he went back to work in the family banking business. But during World War II, even though Sweden was neutral, Wallenberg felt impelled to try to help the people he could. And so he went into service, actually funded by the OSS, the precursor of the CIA, and he was sent to Hungary, where there were still hundreds of thousands of Jews still surviving. But once Hungary was taken over by the Arrow Cross, a right-wing fascist militia, and then ultimately by the Germans directly, that's when the architect of the final solution showed up and began to deport the Jews, tens and hundreds and thousands. Wallenberg, again, didn't have to be there, didn't have to risk his life, but he did. He began a printing press, printing fake passes, claiming that these people had protection of the Swedish embassy. He convinced other neutral embassies to do the same. Altogether, he managed to save tens of thousands of lives. Not because they were Swedes, or because he knew them from the University of Michigan, or because they looked like him, or spoke like him, or lived his values. They were people. And they deserved his empathy only on that basis. Now, at the end of his life, the Soviet army appeared outside of Budapest. He went out to meet with the Soviet general to try to get food and supplies for the people living in the houses and the apartment buildings that he had filled with survivors. And he was never seen by the outside world again. He disappeared into the Soviet prison system. There were supposed reported sightings of him. The Soviets claimed he died of a heart attack in 1947. We'll probably never know. But he was a wonderful role model for a 13-year-old person to say, you can act to help other people, even if they are not you or not part of your group. And that's the reasoning behind that Talmud quotation being deployed by protesters who want to speak for the value of saving any human life, anywhere, any identity. But there's a secret about that Talmud quote. The Talmud was originally handwritten long before the printing press. And there are various manuscripts that sometimes have small differences in the text. And in that particular passage, there is an alternate manuscript reading which says, whoever saves a life in Israel, meaning whoever saves a Jewish life, it is as if they have saved the entire universe. Well, now, what was this wonderful example of universal concern feels parochial, feels selfish, self-centered, limited, problematic. Maybe it goes from perfectly ethical to problematic, even unethical. You saw that passage in the service, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, who counts as your neighbor? What is the boundary of your neighborhood? There are plenty of examples in Jewish life of this debate of us or all of us. How do you define the lines? Which genealogy of humanity do you emphasize for your orbit of concern? Is it the Ben Adam, the son of Adam? Although technically it's really the son of Noah, because everybody else gets wiped out and it's just the Noahites that managed to live afterward. Or are you focused more specifically on the children of Abraham, the Semites, or even more parochially on the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, the sons of Israel? And remember, Jacob, that third of that patriarchal line, gets renamed Israel. So the children of Israel is a family identification, but it's an us, not an all of us. In the Hebrew Bible we read, do not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. But of course, again, the devil's in the details. The word stranger in Hebrew is ger. Ger could mean the resident alien, the immigrant, the green card holder, really would be what a ger would be, a resident alien, not part of our people, but with some rights and some consideration. But when the rabbis read that same passage, do not oppress the stranger, the ger, in Rabbinic Judaism, ger means a convert, someone who becomes Jewish. Again, we have this universal ethic of love the stranger becomes love the convert, someone who's joined our group. Now, it's good to have an open door to welcome people in, but again, it still feels more parochial and less universal. In the Talmud, the rabbis ask, where do we know that we can break Shabbat to save a life? If someone's dying, can I make a phone call? Well, they didn't say that in the Talmud, but if someone's dying, can I put out a fire or set a fire to warm them or otherwise break this prohibition? And the answer the rabbis give is that you break one Shabbat so the person you save can observe many Shabbats to come. Good math, right? What if they're not Jewish? They don't observe any Shabbats. They're not going to be observing any Shabbats in the future if you break this one. Well, they have another reason for that. They say, Mipnei darchei shalom, because of the paths of peace, we save the non-Jewish life, even by breaking Shabbat. And one of the debates in interpretation is the paths of peace simply common good sense behavior with your neighbor? Or is it because if we get a reputation for not helping them, it's going to be bad news for us? What's the reasoning? Well, it could go either way. Or think about the Passover Seder. We just had some Seders. Some people had 2 Seders, some people had 3 Seders, depending on their family and their interests. Remember that part, usually around the 2nd cup of wine, where you remove a little drop of wine for each of the plagues that's taking place? That tradition, by the way, may go back as far as the 11th century. There are some manuscripts that suggest people were taking drops out of wine even that far back. Now, my guess is, at your Seder that you attended, you heard this as expressing sympathy for the suffering of the Egyptians, reducing the joy of our 2nd cup in commiseration and empathy for the suffering of the Egyptians. But originally, removing the wine might have represented a lot less empathy, and it was just more vengeance. So here's a passage describing the meaning behind that ritual from Chabad.org, so coming from a very orthodox perspective. The 4 cups altogether correspond both to the redemption of the Jews and the retribution that is meted out to our enemies. Thus we spill out the wine to symbolize that these plagues and retributions should befall our enemies and not us. In a somewhat similar vein, some explain the 4 cups as representing the 4 cups of retribution God will bring upon the enemies of the Jewish people at the time of redemption. And spilling out drops of wine symbolizes that the plagues were but a drop compared to those 4 cups of vengeance. Drop by drop, the wine in the cup is lessened, just as the Egyptians were diminished by the plagues. Some explain that diminishing our wine symbolizes our wish that the power of those who harm our people be similarly curtailed. So maybe originally it wasn't a universal empathy message at all. Now, are the Jews unusually tribal? Are the Jews inherently untrustworthy when it comes to having concern for people beyond their boundaries, as some anti-Semites might claim? Well, of course not. The Jews are people like other peoples. There are Jewish nationalists, but there are white nationalists and black nationalists. The Japanese called their homeland the island of the gods. The Greeks called any non-Greek a barbarian, and on and on. In fact, some Jewish people have actually gone to the other extreme. They've cared so much about universal humanity that they leave their Jewish concerns entirely behind. A man in Poland named Ludwig Zamenhof invented a language called Esperanto, which was designed to be a global language that everybody could learn. Yes, it was based on European languages, so it wasn't really universal. He should have started with, Chinese or something like that if you want to hit the greatest number, but whatever. But he wanted to create this universal language that was easy to learn and simple rules and everybody could speak it. He himself was Jewish, but he refused to join the Jewish Esperanto Speakers Club because he wanted to be a universalist, not parochial. Or another example is a radical revolutionary named Rosa Luxemburg. And in a letter to her friend, she wrote her sentiments very profoundly, powerfully, but also problematically. So this is a letter she wrote in 1916. Look, girl, if you so rarely find the opportunity to take a book in your hands, at least make a point of reading good books, not such kitsch as the Spinoza novel you just sent me. Why do you come to me with your particular Jewish sorrows? I feel equally close to the wretched victims of the rubber plantations in Putumayo, or to the Negroes in Africa with whose bodies the Europeans are playing catch-ball. Do you remember the words elicited by the General Staff's work on Trotha's campaign in the Kalahari Desert? The rattling in the throats of the dying and the mad screams of those who were withering from thirst faded away into the sublime stillness of the infinite. Oh, this sublime stillness of the infinite in which so many screams fade away unheard. It reverberates within me so strongly that I have no separate corner of my heart for the ghetto. I feel at home in the entire world, wherever there are clouds and birds and human tears. Don't come to me with your particular Jewish suffering, she says. Think about Leon Trotsky, who left behind his Jewishness as best he could, even though he was Lev Bronstein by birth. And at one time after the revolution, the former chief rabbi of Moscow said, "The Trotskys make the revolution, but the Bronsteins pay the bills." Meaning sometimes you want to be universal, but those roots are still there. Sometimes we might feel an impulse, if we're talking about anti-Semitism, which we've talked about at Kol Hadash and which is being talked about all the time these days. We sometimes feel the impulse when mentioning anti-Semitism that we should also mention other hatreds that are out there and that are also bad. Racism and sexism and homophobia and anti-Muslim or anti-Arab bias and so on and so on. But I'm curious to evaluate our psychological process. Why do we feel the need to always also mention those other hatreds? Is it to preempt either the accusation from outside or a guilty feeling from inside that we're being too tribal by focusing on anti-Semitism? That it should only be one of many hatreds and not stand alone? Are we worried about being accused that our empathy ends with the boundaries of Jewish identity? And there are people who make a lot of noise about anti-Semitism and themselves are homophobic and themselves are racist because their orbit of concern is the limited us, not the all of us. Remember the Black Lives Matter movement? It's still out there, of course. But the response to Black Lives Matter by some people was, well, why are you caring so much about that group? All lives matter. It was, in fact, an argument about empathy. Do you only care for your group, or do you care for all groups? Well, similarly, if we're talking about hatred in the world, if we always have to talk about all the hatreds, are we really saying all hatreds matter? Or can we spend a little bit of time, once in a while, talking about the one that affects us, without being accused or feeling like we've failed in the empathy test? The crisis in empathy that we face is not only a Jewish issue, it's also an American issue. Think about the coarseness of our politics, the mocking, the anger, the desire to own the libs on one side or to collect MAGA tears on the other side, the dehumanization of targeted populations like the transgender community or immigrants, both those with permission to be here and those who are undocumented, and even criminals who do still have some rights, I've heard. Despite everything that we've seen over the past several weeks, the issue on which Donald Trump's approval is the highest remains immigration. Around 50% of Americans approve of his handling of immigration, give or take a few points here or there, far better than economy or environment or other issues that you might ask about. Why? Because so many people consider these enforcement actions by the Border Patrol or Customs taking people at airports for hours, or ICE operating anywhere. We saw that raid in Highwood just this week. All those actions, many Americans feel, are aimed at them, not us. How many stories have you seen? Oh, I didn't think they would take that person. They were going for the criminals, right? Well, if you define anybody here without documentation as a criminal, then everybody in that category is subject to removal. You heard a story maybe, I think it was 2 weeks ago. There was an ICE raid in an apartment building, I believe in New York. They detained 3 teenagers, and one of the ICE agents said, "Oh, we've got the wrong person here." And the lead agent in charge said, "Take him anyway." That phrase, "take him anyway," that's a failure of empathy, a failure of common decency. It's indifference to the truth. It's indifference to justice. Now, you might claim it's against the American way, except we have to remember, you'd be ignoring or forgetting the true American way historically when it came to Chinese immigrants and the Japanese living in America in the 1940s and the Jim Crow South. You don't have to look to Germany. You can look around and open a book or go to a museum. Now, encouraging people to be more empathetic is not a formula. There's no magic way to do it, but clearly circumstances may make us more or less likely to be empathetic. So I want to consider a couple of alternatives. Which context is more likely to make you more empathetic with the other, and which might make you less empathetic? First one. If you're facing economic hardship or you're economically prosperous, in which context do you think you're more likely to have empathy for those beyond your group? Well, I would think prosperity, right? You have the luxury of being empathetic instead of the circling the wagons. If you're facing the fear of violence, or you're facing a situation of war instead of a situation of social stability and safety, well, if you feel safe, again, maybe you feel the luxury of empathy. But if you feel threatened, if you fear violence, if you're in a war, are you really going to be empathetic to the outside, to the other group? I was told by my son, who gets into very interesting corners of YouTube sometimes, that there is a ban on Russian books in Ukraine right now. You cannot import Russian books into Ukraine. I understand why, even though there are plenty of native Russian speakers who are Ukrainian. But this is not the time. They're not in a context where they can feel empathy for those speakers. Which would make you more empathetic? If you lived and worked and went to school in a homogeneous community where everybody identified more or less the same, or if you lived and worked and went to school in a diverse community, which is going to encourage you to be more empathetic? Well, we would think diversity, unless you feel threatened by that diversity. Unless it's not harmonious diversity, it's conflict diversity. That doesn't necessarily increase your empathy. You could read stories about people growing up in the ethnic neighborhoods of New York or Chicago in the 1910s and 20s, where Easter weekend was not a good time to be Jewish, because you would be targeted in the schoolyard, on the walk home, in the alleys. I mean, the pogroms, to another degree, but it was diversity that wasn't cooperative. So not all diversity is going to lead to tolerance and empathy. And finally, two more. If you experience in your family mostly in-group partnerships and family units, like marries like and raises like, or what if your family has members from another ethnic background, another cultural identity, another religious tradition? If you're in a blended family, a mixed family like that, are you more likely to be empathetic to the other? I would think so. And then finally, if you identify with the majority establishment identity, or if you are part of a marginalized minority group, which context would make you more likely to be empathetic to the other? Well, that one's a trick question, because either one could go either way. Some who are part of the majority establishment identity and culture feel at home in their skin, and they're open to others who they can connect with on equal ground. Where some people in a marginalized minority group might feel besieged, might feel threatened, might put up high walls, might insist on speaking their language of origin. Think about the ultra-Orthodox Jewish enclaves in upstate New York and other places. These are small minority groups who are not celebrating diversity. They put up the walls in language and culture and religion and practice and even geography. Now, I could delineate many more of these contexts, but I think you get the idea, the pattern, that there are certain people, experiences, settings, contexts, moments when we might be more inclined to have empathy for the other, and others that put up the walls higher. To be fair, it can be challenging to put yourself in the shoes of other people. There are all these classic stories of politicians who were implacably opposed to same-sex marriage until their child was gay and wanted to get married, and all of a sudden they saw the light because it affected them. And that's also a limited failure of empathy. That experience, though, was the reasoning behind the whole concept of coming out. In 1978, Harvey Milk's campaign against banning gay teachers in California had this slogan: come out wherever you are. But the message was, the more people who knew someone gay, who realized they had family members who were gay, who realized wonderful people who contributed positively to their lives were in that category, the more empathy would be produced. But if you feel attacked, if you feel threatened, if you feel uncertain about the change that seems to be facing you, you do circle the wagons. You raise the barriers to your empathy, not only national or political borders, but even personal, emotional borders. I've been thinking about the limits of empathy every week since October 7th of 2023. As I read and watch and hear podcasts about Hamas's brutal attack and their taking of hostages, and Israel's ongoing response to destroy Hamas and try to release the hostages, crushing Gaza and the Gazans in the process. The far left supporting Hamas as anti-colonialist resistance, justifying any means necessary to eliminate Israel, including rape, including the murder of children and seniors and kidnapping, and the denial of the reality of the Israeli suffering from those features. Well, that was a failure of empathy. Now, the Israeli far right has described nuking or depopulating Gaza, either for new Israeli settlements or for Trump's Gaza-Lago idea. The Israeli Defense Force has loosened and then loosened again and loosened again. What's an acceptable number of civilian casualties for a high-value target? And we've seen that number grow and grow, despite the risks to the hostages, let alone the humanity of the collateral damage, to use that terrible phrase. There's been the preventing of the entry of food and medical aid, which hurts Hamas, but also hurts the people. And there's even been Israeli politicians condemning as traitors the Israeli hostage families and reserve soldiers and Jewish leaders elsewhere, including me, who have pushed to end the war to save Israeli lives and also to save Gazan lives. They've called those people, they've called us traitors to the Jewish people because we have empathy for the hostage families and for the hostages and also for the Gazans. Now, I understand, I get it. During World War II, after Pearl Harbor and the Japanese Army's war atrocities, Americans had no empathy for Japanese civilians dying in mass bombings of cities even before Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They didn't even have empathy for American citizens of Japanese descent being dispossessed and imprisoned in camps in the middle of nowhere, which, by the way, was the last time the Enemy Aliens Act of 1798 was invoked before 2025. In full view of the smoldering ashes of the Holocaust, and we observe Holocaust Memorial Day next week, there was little empathy either for Germans in bombed-out cities, or Germans being expelled from parts of Poland and Czechoslovakia, or Germans being caught in the Soviet gulag. When our people are killed or threatened, screw them. I get it. And I understand why many in the Jewish world don't want to consider the Gazan civilians, who say Gaza's all Hamas. And I understand the Palestinian activists who minimize Jewish and Israeli fears and existential dread, and even were denialists about Israeli suffering on October 7th. It takes a kind of trauma terror to make one see any Palestinian flag as no longer a national symbol, but a material support for terrorism. If it's got to be us or them, it's going to be them. And yet, precisely when it's hard, that's when we most need empathy. That Soviet gulag that swallowed so many Germans, it also swallowed Raoul Wallenberg. There are Gazans risking their lives now, in the middle of mass destruction, to publicly reject Hamas because of what Hamas has wrought upon Palestinians. Now, there's an argument being made that not destroying Hamas is not showing empathy for future victims of future actions, because if you leave Hamas in place, they're going to rebuild and they're going to attack again. So who's the one failing in empathy? Well, the reality is you're comparing the possibility of what might happen in the future to the certainty of current suffering and destruction. I said 15 months ago, when this crisis began, it seems like 15 years, I said then that Israel should claim that Hamas has 1.5 million hostages. The Israelis, yes, but also all those Gazans. And if anybody says, well, Gazans voted for them, they voted for them 19 years ago. That's not current. In fact, most of the population wasn't alive or able to vote in that parliamentary election in that different world of 2006. And you can see with the threat of death and torture facing them, people protesting against Hamas. They're there. They exist. But because Israel was focused on the Israelis and the Thai workers that were taken, and for totally understandable reasons, I understand why it was an us versus them dynamic. They focused on theirs, but didn't make Hamas the enemy. But Hamas is the real enemy. If only they could have done that, but that required superhuman empathy that they weren't ready for. The more violence done in revenge, the more enemies you'll have to fight. There's a marvelous documentary from about 20 years ago called In Counterpoint. It's about an organization called the Bereaved Families Forum. It connects people who have lost family members from the Israeli Jewish community, from the Israeli Palestinian community, and from the West Bank and Gaza and Palestinian communities, where they shared their loss. They share the story of the person who died, and they find common ground in their common grief. They try to hold a joint Memorial Day observance every year on Israeli Memorial Day. It's very hard to do, and a lot of people push back against them on both sides of the divide. But it's an attempt to express empathy for the other. If I've suffered and you've suffered, let's say we have suffered. Maybe it's a path to healing or to compromise or just to hearing the other. We are allowed to care for our family, our community, our own identity. We are allowed to take prudent steps to protect them, which may require occasionally violence or warfare or self-defense, be it in Israel or Ukraine or on the streets of America. We are allowed to focus on our own suffering, our own vulnerabilities and challenges as Jews facing anti-Semitism. But the price of our security cannot be our adversaries' humanity. They remain people with rights and dignity and fears and possibility. I started with a quote from the Talmud. I want to end with a quote from the Talmud. This is the famous line from Rabbi Hillel, And it's a marvelous example of balancing the us and the them, the in and the out, both fear and hope. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am Rosa Luxemburg, no room in my heart for Jewish suffering, then why would anyone else care what happens to my family, to my people? If I am for myself alone, what am I? If all I care about is what happens to the Jews, or to American native-born citizens, or the people I happen to know, then do I even matter to the world of humanity beyond my reach? And if not now, when? The limits of empathy are in our own hearts, and it's up to us to choose. There was once a teacher who wanted to convey a lesson to his students about empathy, but they weren't learning it. One of them showed up that day and said to the rabbi, "Rabbi, in one of my hands, I hold a bird. Is the bird alive or dead?" The rabbi knew that if he said the bird was alive, the man would squeeze his hand, kill the bird, and the bird would be dead. But if he said the bird was dead, he would open his hand and the bird would fly away. The rabbi thought for a moment and then said, "Is the bird alive or dead? The choice is up to you." Well, I hope you found this exploration of empathy, the limits of empathy, the cause of those limits, and the possibility for opening our hearts again to be at least somewhat moving or important to hear. I'm happy to chat more about this during our Oneg after our service, and again, I want to thank our Oneg hosts for providing that. Thank you to those online who joined as well. You'll have to self-actualize when it comes to Oneg, because we haven't yet found a way to send you a cookie over Zoom. So in the meantime, we'll have a chance to share some of that here. And our closing song, which is on the last page of our service, is a wonderful statement for this message of the desire for empathy and peace. It's called Na'aseh Shalom, Let Us Make Peace.
Na'aseh Shalom ba'olam, Na'aseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom, Na'aseh shalom, Na'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'achol ha'olam, 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 Na'aseh shalom, Na'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'achol ha'olam.
Once again, I want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom, and please wish Shabbat Shalom to the people that are near you. And Shabbat Shalom to all those online as well.